It is the year 1870, a year after Maria del Garnier had had her vision of the Sacred Heart. In 1870, there were a number of events that were going to deeply impact on the life of Maria del Garnier. The first one was the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War. In 1870, the Prussians invaded France and were sweeping everything before them, arriving at the gates of Paris and just a few miles from Laval, where Maria del Garnier was living. It caused uproar in France. Napoleon III was deposed and went into exile. There was no strong government. The Second Republic had come to an end, and it gave birth in 1870 to the rise of the Paris Communes. Next door, in Italy, in 1870, the country was gradually being unified. The states that had formed what was now Italy were now merging together. And on the 20th of September 1870, the Italian army, as it now was, marched into Rome, took over the Vatican, made the prisoner of the Pope, and thereby brought an end to the Papal States. The other event was the First Vatican Council. Even though the Pope was a prisoner, the authorities allowed him to carry out his spiritual duties. Now, in the wake of all these events, on the 17th of January 1871, Our Lady appeared to some children in the village of Pontmain on the Brittany-Normandy border. She came to give them a message. Normally, in times of trials and tribulation, people turn to God. But her message to them was, God is now turning to you. My son is listening to you. And it gave people a great hope for the future. What actually happened that evening was that the Prussians actually withdrew 20 kilometers from Laval, and a week later a truce was signed between France and Prussia, bringing an end to the war. When Maria del Garnier heard about the apparition at Pontmain, she rushed there and she spoke to the children who had seen the vision. They described to her how the vision appeared. It was a lady dressed in a blue robe with golden stars and who wore a distinctive black veil. Based on these descriptions of the children, Maria del Garnier, who was a gifted artist, drew a picture of the apparition, including all the details that the children had told her. Strangely enough, several years before the apparition, a young enthusiastic priest had gone to Pontmain, and he had completely refurbished the church there. And the ceiling he had painted, he got in blue with golden stars, just like as appeared on the robe of Our Blessed Lady. Furthermore, it should be noted that whenever anybody sees a picture of the apparition at Pontmain or looks at the statue of Our Lady of Pontmain, they are looking at the work of Maria del Garnier. Now, among the many devotions that were springing up because of the way the people were now turning to God was one called the National Vow. Now, behind me you will see the Basilica of Montmartre, and the Basilica of Montmartre is the physical embodiment of what became known as the National Vow. The origins of the National Vow are a bit like the basilica behind me, shrouded in the midst of time. We need to go back to the year 1689, to the small town of Pontmain, where there was a nun called Margaret Mary Alacoque, later to become a saint, who was receiving messages from the Sacred Heart. Now, one of these messages was that she was to ask the king to have a monument built in which the image of the Sacred Heart would be displayed. Secondly, that the king and all his courtiers would consecrate themselves to the Sacred Heart. And thirdly, that the image of the Sacred Heart would be included in the coat of arms and all the royal standards. Nothing happened. We fast forward now to the French Revolution, and it's 1793, January. Louis XVI is in prison and is writing what was to become his last will and testament. And in that he said that if his life was spared, he would see to it that the effects of the Sacred Heart's petitions would be fulfilled. Sadly, the next morning, he went to the guillotine. Nothing happened. In 1870, in the height of the Franco-Prussian War, people were turning to God, and suddenly these promises were remembered. And in the Battle of Loigny, the French soldiers unfurled a flag carrying the image of the Sacred Heart. Now this inspired a lot of people, particularly a man in Poitiers called Alexandre le Gentil. He and his family gathered together and started a movement, the object of which was to build a church devoted to the Sacred Heart, where prayers would be offered in reparation for the sins of the people of France and for the Pope as well. And this gathered momentum. Soon it received the approval of the Bishop of Poitiers. And then the Cardinal of Paris, Cardinal Gilbert, also approved it. And in 1873, Pope Pius IX gave it his supreme approval. It had now gathered full momentum. And in July of 1873, believe it or not, the French Parliament issued a decree whereby a building was to be built to honour the Sacred Heart on behalf of the people of France. That law also extended to the Archbishop buying the necessary land and even expropriating it if that was necessary. The land the Archbishop chose was Montmartre, this great big hill here, which had a great significance for the people of France, because it was on this hill in the 3rd century that Saint Denis, the first bishop of France, was martyred. The first stone of the basilica was laid in 1875. It was not completed until 1914 and wasn't consecrated until 1990. And it has been here as an emblem looking over the city of Paris ever since that day. While all this talk about the basilica at Montmartre was going on, Maria del Garnier was in Ulm, fulfilling her role as the governess of the Crochet family. One evening in September 1874, she learned about this new building of a basilica to the Sacred Heart at Montmartre. Immediately she was galvanized, and she felt that Jesus was saying to her, "I need you to be there." She also had a vision of what this basilica would look like. She saw a great white Byzantine building. Now her father was an architect, so she would know what a Byzantine building looked like. One evening, while reading the life of St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, she felt a greater understanding of what all these visions meant, and she writes, "I felt Jesus speaking to my heart, illuminated by a light of surpassing brightness. He told me that it was his will that his heart, present in the Holy Eucharist, should be the object of worship of Montmartre, and that the Blessed Sacrament should be exposed there night and day." And then the vision finished by saying, "Go find the Archbishop of Paris and tell him." This for Maria del Garnier was a terrifying prospect. I mean, who was she to tell a cardinal what to do? It's very reminiscent of Moses going to Pharaoh and saying, "Release the Israelites." She felt something like this was way beyond her pay grade. Anyway, she talked to her spiritual director, Père Chambellan, and he advised her to be courageous and to go to Paris and to see what she could do there. So in December the 5th, she went to Paris. She found lodgings in Paris, and when she got there, she wrote a letter to the Archbishop asking for an audience with him. The next day, when she got back to her lodgings after Mass, there was a letter from the Archbishop to say, yes, he would see her. She made it very clear that the message that she had was for his ears only. She told the Archbishop of the message she had received from the Sacred Heart. That adoration was to take place night and day in this new basilica. Archbishop Guibert was not terribly over-enthused when she mentioned that. He was very unsure of whether it would be possible or not. However, she had delivered the message as ordered, and she went back to Ulm to continue her role as governess of the family there. Little did she know that 150 years later, we would see the impact of that meeting with the Archbishop of Paris. However, the seeds of adoration at Montmartre had been sown into her, and they began to flourish and grow, and she developed this great urge to be there. Her family were very supportive of her idea, but her spiritual director, Père Chambellan, was very cautious, and he made 3 conditions before which he would advise her to go. The first one was that her health had to be robust and strong, and we know that it hasn't been all that great. Secondly, she would need to have a friend with her, otherwise she would be all alone in a totally new experience. And thirdly, she would put herself under the authority of the Mother Superior of the local convent, who would provide moral and spiritual support. All these things were put into place, and it was agreed that Maria del Garnier would go to Montmartre and commence her life as an adorer of the Sacred Heart. Leaving the de Crochet family at Laval was a great wrench for Maria del Garnier, and the family themselves were inconsolable that they had lost a really good governess that they all loved. Furthermore, Maria del Garnier had spent 8 very happy years with the de Crochet family. Now, when she came to Paris, she moved to here, 46 Rue de la Barre, and she took up her place here in the attics up there at the top. Now, this wasn't the first time she'd actually seen this place. A few months before, she had come to Paris when one of the children needed medical treatment for an eye condition, and she was passing along this road and she remarked how lovely it would be to live in this house behind me, 46 Rue de Laval. Saying nothing more, she went back to Laval, and when it was decided that she was going to come to Montmartre, she asked a friend to arrange lodgings for her. And on Easter Sunday, she got a receipt for 4 months' accommodation for this place here behind me, the place she had admired when she was here a few weeks before. She called her new home Nazareth. Her wish had been granted, her prayers had been answered, and she was very happy to be here. Spending the first night here in bliss, so to speak, she woke up the next morning feeling very positive. It was the anniversary of her first Holy Communion, and that day she would take communion here at Montmartre for the first time. She recalls in her memoirs, "I offered myself to Jesus without reservation, asking him to take me as a victim, either by taking away my life, as I desired, or by making it entirely consecrated to his good pleasure, without leaving me the least personal satisfaction." The phrase, "be careful what you ask for," springs to mind. That first night she had, after that saying, was one of extreme suffering for her. She suffered physically, mentally, emotionally. She describes it as a satanic assault. She felt as if she was being nailed. She could not move, and she spent all night in that situation, in dread and terror. The next morning, when she got up, she found herself unable to move. She couldn't move her legs or her feet. Gradually, as the morning wore on, she regained her mobility, and she made her way back to the convent where the Mother Superior was, and she said to her, "If I stay at Montmartre, I will die." The Mother Superior took a very no-nonsense approach and said to her, "Then you will die, go back to Montmartre," and sent her back there with some very consoling and encouraging words. In spite of these attacks, shall I say, she continued at Montmartre, and she writes in her memoirs, "Little by little, my life became a martyrdom, of which even now the remembrance makes me shudder in a horrible desert, tortured by the most abominable thoughts during the night, and during the day by unspeakable anguish and terror. All the time I felt that I was damned, and I could see no possibility of appeasing the justice of God. I was reduced to a terrible state. My life was hell." This was from a woman who only recently had had visions of the Sacred Heart. As these bouts continued, she became weaker and weaker, and even the neighbours in the street here noticed how feeble she was becoming. One lady who worked in a bakery actually decided to help her and will cook the meals for her and bring them to her. She became known as the little woman dressed in black in Montmartre. Things came to a head on August the 23rd. That day, in a state of great weakness, she managed to almost drag herself to Mass, and at the end of Mass was unable to move. It took a group of worshippers to carry her back to her home here at Nazareth, and they sent for a doctor and for the Mother Superior. The doctor came and was quite confounded by what he saw. He could not understand it. Anyway, he left her, and a couple of days later, he came back and decided that she was going to die. So they gave her the last rites, and she recovered briefly for a few days. But it was very, very clear to her that she had now to leave Montmartre. Leaving Montmartre broke her heart, but she was always one to do the will of God, and she wrote, "I had gone there by the will of Jesus. I left out of obedience to that same adorable will. There is no doubt that when she left Montmartre, she entertained the hope of one day returning there. But that was not to be for many years to come.